By the mid-19th century, Egypt was on a quest to modernize and expand its influence. This included the financing of major infrastructure projects like the Suez Canal. These efforts, however, plunged the country into heavy debt. To stabilize Egypt's finances, Britain and France established an international debt commission to oversee its economy, further tightening their grip on the region. The worsening conditions in Sudan, marked by economic hardship, political neglect, and local unrest, raised alarms in Egypt. In the 1870s, a Muslim cleric named Muhammad Ahmad began preaching Islamic renewal and national liberation. He gained a large following and in 1881 declared himself the Mahdi, a messianic figure in Islam. The Egyptian governor, Rauf Pasha, sent Mohammed Bey Abu Saud to investigate the situation. Arriving on Abba Island on the 7th of August 1881, Abu Saud requested that Muhammad Ahmad come to Khartoum to meet with the Governor-General. The Mahdi refused, and Abu Saud warned him that he must give up his claim to be the Mahdi, and then left the island. After that meeting, an arrest party of 200 Egyptian soldiers were sent to Abba Island. The zealous Mahdists, armed mainly with sticks, stones and palm knives, attacked the Egyptians. The Egyptians were completely overwhelmed, and only a few men managed to escape. Following this early victory, the Mahdi withdrew strategically to Kordofan, far from Egyptian control in Khartoum. His movement grew rapidly as Arab tribes joined his jihad against the Egyptian government. The Mahdi and the forces of his Ansar arrived in the Nuba Mountains around early November 1881. Another Egyptian expedition of around 400 men dispatched from Fashoda arrived around 1 month later. However, this Egyptian force was ambushed on the night of the 9th of December 1881. The entire force was killed, including the force commander and all his principal leadership team. Alarmed by the scale of the rebellion, the Egyptian administration assembled a larger force of 4,000 troops under Yusuf Pasha in mid-1882. Despite the Mahdist forces being poorly equipped and half-starved, Egyptian overconfidence proved fatal. They camped near the Mahdist position without setting up sentries. On the 7th of June 1882, the Mahdi launched a surprise attack at dawn. The Mahdists completely destroyed the Egyptian army and captured large quantities of arms, supplies, and uniforms, significantly boosting the Mahdist cause. As the Egyptian government increasingly came under British control, European powers began to take greater notice of the escalating crisis in Sudan. British advisors to the Egyptian administration quietly approved plans for a new military expedition to suppress the Mahdist uprising. Over the summer of 1883, Egyptian forces were assembled in Khartoum, eventually totaling around 8,300 men, 300 artillerymen, and 20 guns. Command of the expedition was given to Colonel William Hicks, a retired officer from the British Indian Army, supported by 12 other European officers. However, the force was poorly prepared. The expedition's objective was to relieve the besieged city of El-Obeid, but by the time the army departed from Khartoum, the city had already fallen to the Mahdists. Despite this, Hicks pressed on. In response, the Mahdi gathered a force of roughly 40,000 men, who were now well armed and trained using weapons captured in earlier battles. In late 1883, the British were ambushed near El-Obeid by the forces of the Mahdi. Surrounded in the desert without reliable supplies, Hicks's army was annihilated. Only a few hundred survived. The defeat gave the Mahdi control of much of Sudan and shattered Egyptian authority in the region. By this point in the war, Britain had almost complete financial control over Egypt, and under increasing pressure from their British advisors, the Egyptian government decided to withdraw from Sudan, effectively ending Egypt's costly and unsustainable military presence there. Concerns soon emerged over how to safely evacuate the scattered Egyptian garrisons. To ensure an orderly withdrawal and prevent bloodshed, the task was entrusted to General Charles Gordon, a widely respected officer. Yet Gordon's strong sense of personal honor and impulsive nature made some British officials uneasy, fearing he might act on his own initiative. To balance his unpredictability, the government paired him with Colonel John Stewart, a more cautious and pragmatic figure. Gordon left England on the 18th of January 1884, arriving in Cairo 6 days later. His mission had two clear objectives. First, to evacuate the Egyptian garrisons in Sudan, both soldiers and civilians, and second, to establish a local Sudanese government. When Gordon reached Khartoum on the 18th of February, Gordon quickly grasped the enormity of the challenge. The Egyptian garrisons were scattered across vast distances, while most of the territory between them was already dominated by the Mahdi's forces. Furthermore, tribes north of Khartoum, previously neutral or even sympathetic to the Egyptian authorities, rose in support of the Mahdi. The telegraph lines linking Khartoum to Cairo were cut, severing all communication with the outside world. Gordon and his force of 7,000 Egyptian soldiers now found themselves isolated and trapped in Khartoum. Under mounting public pressure, the British government dispatched a relief expedition of some 11,000 troops under Sir Garnet Wolseley to save the Khartoum garrison from an estimated 50,000 Mahdist warriors. On the 17th of January 1885, the British clashed with Mahdist forces at the Battle of Abu Klea, securing a hard-fought but decisive victory. By the end of the month, the relief column reached the outskirts of Khartoum, only to discover they had arrived too late. The city had fallen 2 days earlier, and Gordon, along with the garrison, had been massacred. With Khartoum lost, the British withdrew, leaving Sudan temporarily under Mahdist control. The newly established Mahdist state struggled with internal divisions, economic collapse, and famine. Meanwhile, Britain's growing competition with France for influence in Africa, along with fears that a weakened Mahdist state might invite foreign rivals into the Nile Valley, renewed imperial interest in Sudan. The memory of Gordon's death also lingered in the British public's imagination, fueling a sense of unfinished business. Under General Herbert Kitchener, Britain and Egypt launched a modern, well-supplied campaign to reconquer Sudan. Unlike the improvised and uncertain efforts of the early 1880s, this second invasion would be waged with clear purpose and overwhelming technological superiority. Kitchener advanced up the Nile with a force of 9,000 men, 15 cavalry and camel corps squadrons, and 3 artillery batteries. The British also had support from gunboats, who were following the main force as they marched up the Nile, capturing small strongholds and securing river crossings along the Nile. By this point in the war, due to the Mahdi's death, leadership had passed to Khalifa Abdullahi ibn Muhammad, the Mahdi's successor. Although suffering minor defeats at the hands of the British, the Khalifa commanded an army inherited from the Mahdi of some 60,000 men. Kitchener's forces encountered some resistance, but these engagements were generally brief and one-sided. The use of artillery and machine guns, combined with disciplined infantry formations, allowed the Anglo-Egyptian army to overcome Mahdist positions with minimal casualties. By securing villages and fortifications along the way, the expedition steadily weakened Mahdist control and prepared the way for the next stages of the campaign. The capture of Dongola itself was achieved with remarkable efficiency. Mahdist forces attempted to defend the town, but they were no match for Kitchener's well-coordinated attacks. The fall of Dongola on September 1896 represented a significant victory. It secured northern Sudan for the Anglo-Egyptian forces, provided a base for further operations down the Nile, and sent a clear message that the reconquest of Sudan was underway. After the success of the first expedition, Kitchener turned his attention further south toward the heart of Mahdist Sudan, and due to the railway that had been built, fresh troops were continuously arriving. The expedition progressed again along the Nile, capturing more key towns and fortifications along the way. As the British advanced steadily toward Omdurman, Emir Mahmud gathered his army of 10,000 men and marched to the junction of the Nile to confront the British. The Mahdist warriors waited at the junction for the British to attack. On the night of the 4th of April, Kitchener quietly advanced with the British and Egyptian army towards the Mahdist camp just outside the town of Nakheila. In the morning, the British began the bombardment. After a brief bombardment, the combined British and Egyptian brigades attacked. After 45 minutes of intense hand-to-hand combat, Osman Digna led a few thousand warriors on a retreat to the south. The battle was over, and most of the remainder Mahdist soldiers were killed or captured. The Mahdists suffered 3,000 casualties, whereas the British only suffered 400. After the British victory, they could now focus all of their attention to the Mahdist capital, Omdurman. On the day of the Battle of Omdurman, Kitchener commanded a force of 8,000 British regulars and a mixed force of 17,000 Sudanese and Egyptian troops. He arrayed his force in an arc around the village of Agega, close to the bank of the Nile, where a 12-gunboat flotilla waited in support. The Mahdists, by this point, had some 50,000 men fighting in their army, plus around 3,000 cavalry. The battle began in the early morning, at around 6 a.m. 8,000 men under Osman Azrak advanced straight at the waiting British, quickly followed by about 8,000 of those waiting to the northwest. They were a mixed force of riflemen and spearmen. The British artillery opened fire, inflicting serious casualties. It was at this point when Mahdist cavalry were sent to a nearby hill to await for the outcome of the battle in the plain. Little to their knowledge, the British cavalry was located here, and so the Mahdists charged their position. The cavalry and camel corps, who were now engaged, found themselves under threat from the Mahdist Green Standard Force of about 15,000 warriors. This marked a crucial stage of the battle, but Kitchener was able to deploy 2 gunboats, where their cannon and Nordenfeldt guns broke up the Mahdist force before it could destroy Broadwood's detachment and possibly penetrate the flank of the Anglo-Egyptian infantry. Back in the center, the British had gained the advantage and decisively beaten the Mahdist wave. The Mahdists suffered 4,000 casualties in the first attack, and none were able to get closer than 20 meters from the British. Having pushed back the first waves of Mahdist attack, Kitchener advanced his army in columns towards Omdurman. The British light cavalry regiment, the 21st Lancers, was sent ahead to clear the plain to Omdurman. One of the men in the regiment was Lieutenant Winston Churchill, commanding a troop of 25 Lancers. The 400-strong regiment attacked what they thought were only a few hundred Mahdists, but in fact there were 2,500 infantry hidden in a depression. After a fierce clash, the Lancers drove them back, resulting in 3 Victoria Crosses being awarded to Lancers who helped rescue wounded comrades. The British advance of their main force continued. This allowed the Khalifa to reorganize his forces. He still had over 30,000 men in the field. As the British advanced, Hector MacDonald, who commanded the rearguard, a force of 3,000 men, Maxim guns and artillery, was alerted to the presence of around 15,000 enemy troops moving towards him from the west. He rapidly lined up his men to face the enemy charge. MacDonald's brigade was soon reinforced with flank support, and the Mahdist forces were forced back. They finally broke and fled, or died where they stood. A final desperate cavalry charge of around 500 Mahdist horsemen on a different British regiment was utterly destroyed. The British had won the battle, and with around 10,000 Mahdist soldiers killed and perhaps another 20,000 killed throughout the course of the war, the military strength of the Mahdist state had been destroyed. The Mahdist capital at Omdurman fell to Kitchener's forces, and effective Mahdist rule in Sudan came to an end. The battle thus paved the way for the establishment of the Anglo-Egyptian condominium in 1899, under which Sudan was nominally ruled by both Britain and Egypt, but was in reality dominated by British authority.